My name, as you heard, is Gadi Edelman. My family moved to Israel when I was very young. And 1 month after my 14th birthday, I survived a terrorist bombing in Jerusalem. And at that time, being young and dumb, but we thought we knew everything, I decided to go out and study. My main concern was what would take an individual to do something like that to another individual. Because what happened to me that night lives with me every single day. And among my studies, I went all the way back to the beginning. I wanted to learn everything there was about terrorism. And terrorism is even in the Bible. We can go all the way back to the Zealots. And I started in biblical times, and I worked my way forward and studied everything I could get my hands on terrorism. Luckily, I was growing up in Israel, where there was a lot of information about terrorism. Had I been in this country, I wouldn't have been able to do it. This country, you know, for the most part, had no terrorism. Pardon me. So I studied, and as I got towards the 20th century, it became more and more that there was this one defining factor. As other organizations stopped using terrorism, there was a different group that started using it more and more often, and that was Islam. So I then found myself having to start to study Islam. So now, after 35 years of studying Islam and studying terrorism, I found myself here and doing this. If you look up top, I host a radio show once a week. I know I have one lady here from Fayetteville who listens to my radio show. Thanks for coming out. This is great. Radio show is called America Akbar. When the Muslims tend to, or terrorists tend to blow themselves up, you'll often hear that they scream, Allahu Akbar. Akbar in Arabic means great. So I've taken a kind of twist on their words, and I've called it America is Great Radio. Amen. I have taught and instructed law enforcement from various groups in North Carolina as well as federally. Of course, when I grew up in Israel, I served in an anti-terror unit over there. And as you go through, I write weekly articles for the Jerusalem Post. I'm the Senior National Security and Terrorism Correspondent on INTN, which is an internet-based radio station, the Israel News Talk Network. And that's all in English, by the way. And also, I'm on the list for Act for America, for those of you that are familiar with Act for America, which is a grassroots organization that was started by Brigitte Gabriel, who was a Lebanese girl, and Christian Lebanese girl, who grew up during the Civil War and lived really until she was about 13 in a bomb shelter. She came to America, and she speaks out about Islam because she, like myself, had firsthand experience as to what it brought her country and her family and her life. So she started Act for America. And you can go to actforamerica.org if you ever want to check them out. They're a great organization. So that's pretty much about me, and as we go on, you'll find out more about me. And I haven't tested this, so let's see if it works. There we go. Oh, should have taken the sound off, huh? That's the call to prayer. Sharia, that's what we wanted to talk about tonight. I'm going to kill that music. Sharia law, stop singing. So much for that. Sharia law, or otherwise known as Islamic law, is what Muslims live under. They do not believe in man-made laws, and I'm going to mute this. That should work. There we go. Sharia law is what Muslims live under. It is their way of life. And what people need to understand, first and foremost, I always explain, Islam is not a religion. I refer to it as a so-called religion. Islam is a political ideology. It's a theocracy that has a religion wrapped up inside it. And they use the religious aspect, especially when they're in Western nations such as the United States, to hide behind the things they do, because here in the United States, under our Constitution, you have religious rights. So we need to understand from the get-go that it is a lot more than just this so-called religion. It does everything from the moment you wake up, to the moment you go to sleep. It deals with business, with banking, with sexuality, with marriage, with hygiene, with even how to go to the bathroom. Everything is governed in their way of life under this Islamic or Sharia law. So that's what we wanted to talk about. This is actually not real, as I explained during my presentations. It's something that should be, and there should be a book out there for Americans, Sharia Law for Dummies, but unfortunately, It's just people like myself that go out and explain what Sharia law is. The reason I started doing this presentation is because I got sick and tired of hearing on the news and on these TV shows, whether it's NBC, ABC, CNN, or even Fox, these so-called experts that say how Sharia law is compatible with the U.S. Constitution. And I'm going to show you tonight, word for word, from their own words, from their Quran, and forgive me, Pastor, for having this up here, from their Quran and from our Constitution, how they differ and how much they differ. Come on now. This is, you gotta love live TV here. So, let's see, there we go. Everyone needs to understand what Islam is. Most people don't even understand the word Islam. And the Arabic word Islam comes from the word submission, where you're surrendering to the only true God. You are worshiping Allah, which is what they refer to as God. You'll often hear Muslims say, oh, it's the same God. No, it's not.
That's right.
Last time I checked, the things that their God tells them to do and the things that our God tells us to do are totally different from one another.
That's right.
It is not the same God. So let's just get started with that. The word Sharia translates to path or path to water. It's Shariat Allah, which is God's laws. Everyone needs to understand that under Sharia law, the Muslims do not believe in man-made laws, period. And we can end it right there. The Constitution was written by men. It doesn't matter why they wrote it, how much of Judean Christianity they used when they wrote the Constitution. It was still written by men. They do not believe in man-made laws, end of story, period. It tells them in the Quran, if it's not in here, it's not a rule. If it's not in here, it's not a law. This is all they believe in. There's no disputing it. There's no way of arguing it. There's no basing an opinion off of it. This is Allah's word. That's the law. And that's why we see in many of these Islamic countries today, even today in the year 2013, that they are still living like it's 1400 years ago. Because that's when this was written. They haven't become more modern because their book tells them you are not allowed to deviate from this. So this is it. This is their laws right here. Shariat Allah, God's law, refers to the legal framework within which the public and private aspects of life are regulated for those living in a legal system based on Islamic principles of jurisprudence. Basically, in simple terms, if you are a Muslim living in an Islamic country, you're going to live under the legal system that is based under Islamic law. The Quran, the Hadith, which is the writings of Muhammad in his life. If you live outside an Islamic country, you still want to try and strive to do your best to live under those laws. That is what we have when it comes to Sharia law. And we're going to give examples of how that is already happening here in this country. We have a constitution. Unfortunately, we also have very, very ignorant judges. I'm trying to think of nice words because we have kids here tonight. Ignorant judges who somehow think that even though this is the United States and we have our own book of rules and laws and we have the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, that when dealing with people from other countries, it's kind of okay to look at what they are used to here in America. And that's where we're starting to see it happen in the United States. And I'm going to give examples of where that's actually occurred. Where that's actually, oh, stop. Where that's actually occurred in the United States. Because we have cases from coast to coast, recent cases, where judges have used Sharia law to actually make rulings in American courts. And this is how it starts. This is what they refer to as creeping Sharia. And as I said on a radio program I was a guest on last night, in Europe we saw creeping Sharia, and what we're seeing here in the United States is steamrolling Sharia, because it's happening so fast, a lot faster than what we saw in Europe. This was actually written by, and at the very last line you'll see it says Zahudi Jasser, MD. Zahudi Jasser I don't necessarily agree with all the time, but he does make some good points. Zuhudi was born and raised in the United States, became a medical doctor, served very proudly and as a patriot in the United States Navy as a medical doctor. He started a group called the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Not two words that you'll often see together, Islamic and democracy. He believes that they need to, he calls himself a devout Muslim, but he does not believe in the violent passages that are in the Quran. Problem is, it says in the Quran you can't take anything out, it cannot be changed, it came from Allah, and that's the way it is, that's the way it's written, that's the way it has to be. He has more fatwas or death contracts on him for being a Muslim that has stated this and started an organization about it than I do, because he is very outspoken. You may or may not have seen him if you watch Fox News. He's often a guest on Fox News. This particular statement that he made a few years ago, what we had was our taxpayer dollars going to fund foot baths in public locations for Muslims who wanted to wash their feet prior to praying. Because one of the things that they do when they go to pray is they have to wash their feet before they get on their prayer rug. So this was a case with the University of Michigan, where publicly funded University of Michigan spent $25,000 of taxpayer money to put in foot baths for Muslim students.
That's crazy.
So here's what he wrote. Supreme Court cases have been heard on far less obvious violations of our Establishment Clause. Many, if not most, American Muslims are currently well able to accommodate our own prayers and ablution to the spacious facilities provided to all other faiths on public grounds without special accommodations. He's absolutely right. Why are we accommodating them differently than any other group? Islamists will often use the free exercise clause when it suits them, but then they turn around and use tax money in the name of Islam when it suits them. The foot bath marks down the slippery slope of preferential treatment of one religion over another, which is what the First Amendment was established to prevent. These baths exert a monetary cost upon publicly funded institutions, which by our Constitution should not appease the financial demands of one faith group over another, and every other faith group on campus should be demanding that they be provided equal funding and space, which basically demonstrates how outrageous these accommodations are. So here you had a man who refers to himself as a devout Muslim, and I have no doubt that he is. I know Zuhudi, we've spoken on the phone, I haven't met him, but I know he prays 5 times a day, and he refers to himself as a devout Muslim, and he's saying this is wrong. This goes against our Constitution. So there you have one example, and there have been many. Has anybody been to the Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix? Every time you go through Sky Harbor, you pay a usage tax or a usage fee, just going through that airport. That money is used to fund the foot baths that they've installed for all their limo and taxi drivers out front who are Muslim. So that way they can continue to be on the job and still have a place to pray. So we're paying for that every time. I got to stop knocking those microphones. We're paying for that every time we go through that airport. And there are many, many cases where that has happened in the United States. Now, back in August of 2010, ABC News was talking to all these legal experts who said they didn't even know of one instance of a judge in the United States where they invoked Sharia law in making a decision on the bench. Now, I wrote an article about that because I was appalled. I don't know what rock these particular experts were sleeping under, but there has been many cases, many, many cases. Particularly this one, which is my personal favorite. Judge Charles Joseph. This took place in August of 2010. A New Jersey family court judge's decision not to grant a restraining order to a woman who was imprisoned, assaulted, sexually abused, and raped by her husband, and forced repeatedly to have sex with him. Now, here's the story. I'll give you the background. It was a young couple. They moved here immigrated to the United States from Morocco. They were both Muslim. She was only 17. He beat her on a regular basis because she didn't know how to cook properly for him. He locked her up in the house, and when she finally escaped through a broken window naked and was found on the street, the police took her story. She had been abused, she had been imprisoned, she had been basically kidnapped, and was sexually abused whenever he felt like it. There was absolutely no argument in court to each and every act. He pled, yeah, I did it. I did it. Read what the judge decided when he found in favor of the defendant, her husband. This court does not feel that under the circumstances that this defendant had a criminal desire or intent to sexually assault or to sexually contact the plaintiff when he did. The court believes that he was operating under his belief that he, as the husband, and as his desire to have sex with her whenever and wherever he wanted to, which was something that was consistent with his practices and was not prohibited. So basically what this judge said was, well, you know what? We have to give this guy a pass because he's a Muslim. Under his beliefs, he didn't do anything wrong. Now, I don't know if we have anybody here that's a paralegal or a lawyer. I know we've got some law enforcement in here. But the first thing you learn when you go to law school, this is first-year law student, ignorance is not a defense of the law. If you go out and commit a crime, the judge doesn't care whether or not you knew it was illegal. It's still illegal. This man beat her, raped her, locked her up. And the judge, an American judge in New Jersey, decided, we got to give him a pass. Now here's my question. What if the female had been an American and not a Muslim? Where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line? Oh, well, yeah, he raped her, but you know what? That's just because he's a Muslim. What happened to our rules and laws? Right. This is what's going on here. Now, thank God, or as they like to say, thank Allah. Thank God this was overturned on an appeal. Amen. The appellate court overturned it, but here's the kicker. Their statement was the judge in this particular case was mistaken. And he's still on the bench. There was nothing that happened to this man for making that statement in court and setting a precedent that it's okay for a Muslim to do what Muslims do because they're Muslims. Circuit Court Judge Richard Nielsen out of Florida. This was an interesting case. There was a mosque in Florida where those founders of the mosque and a new group of newcomers that had been there for quite some time of the mosque, that had worked their way up into the hierarchy of the mosque, they had a falling out. And they decided to split and become two different mosques. Not unheard of. We see it with churches, we see it with synagogues, it happens. Well, they started fighting over the money that the mosque had. Who should that money go to? Well, one group, the elders of the mosque, said, we want to solve this in court. We want to go to civil court and solve this. The other group said, no, 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 no. We should solve this under Sharia law. The judge heard the case, and he said, yeah, we're going to let it be solved under Sharia law. Now, this wasn't an issue where you had a dispute between two Muslim parties who both agreed upon mediation of Sharia. This was a judge making a decision from the bench in the United States that because Muslims were involved, even though one group of them said, no, please, we want to solve this under American law, he ruled it would be solved under pursuant to Islamic law, the Quran. And that was not overturned. Ah, there it is. I forgot I had that slide in there. Florida Appeals Court rejects call to block judge. So they rejected, the Florida Appeals Court rejected it. And it continued on through Sharia law. Now what you have is, and you need to understand that in the United States, in our judicial system, we have what's called mediation. And oftentimes when things go to court, they ask you to settle it out of court. It's cheaper for both parties. It's cheaper for the taxpayer. You go to a mediator. Now what we've seen, and this has been going on for many, many years, especially in New York, which has a very high Jewish population, you have Hasidic or Orthodox Jews. When they have a dispute and they go to court, they'll ask the judge, Your Honor, both parties agree that we'd like to solve this with our rabbi. We'd like to go to mediation. And that's allowed, provided both parties agree. What we had in that case was one screaming, no, we want to go to civil court. And the judge still said it should be solved under mediation under the Quran. This particular case, that's Zombie Muhammad. This particular case, October 2011, happened to be the Pennsylvania State Director of the American Atheists, Ernest Pierce. He dressed up like this during a Halloween parade. And there's a video on YouTube of the assault. Sitting on the curb with his family was a Muslim man who knew that according to the Quran, the punishment for making fun of the Prophet Muhammad is death. And he proceeded to beat the living tar out of this guy. And it went to court. Very interesting. Because this judge, and this is about 3 slides long, not only found in the defendant, the man who committed the assault, the Muslim, not only found him to be not guilty, he refused to allow witnesses, he refused to allow the video of the assault. And this is what he stated from the bench. Having had the benefit of having spent over 2.5 years in a predominantly Muslim countries, I think I know a little bit about the faith of Islam. In fact, I have a copy of the Quran right here. I'll tell you what, if I was the defendant and the judge went, I've got a copy of the Quran right here on my bench, I'd be a little worried. Okay, an American judge pulls out the Quran. Then he goes on to berate this individual. I challenge you, sir, to show me where it says in the Quran that Muhammad arose and walked among the dead. I think you misinterpreted things. Before you start mocking someone else's religion, you may want to find out a little bit more about it. It makes you look like a doofus. This is the victim he's talking to. It makes you look like a doofus. And Mr. El-Abami is correct. In many Arabic-speaking countries, something like this is definitely against the law there. In their society, in fact, it can be punishable by death, and frequently is in their society. This is an American judge saying, you know, if we were in an Islamic country, you could be put to death for this. Funny, I thought they were in Pennsylvania. Islam is not just a religion, it's their culture. Their culture. It's their very essence, their very being. They pray 5 times a day towards Mecca to be a good Muslim. Before you die, you have to make a pilgrimage to Mecca unless you are otherwise told you cannot because you are too ill or too elderly. Whatever. But you must make the attempt. Their greetings, Walalakum al-salam, is answered by voice, may God be with you. Whenever, it's very common when speaking with each other, it's very common for them to say, this will happen. It's also, they are so immersed in it. Then what you have done is you have completely trashed their essence, their being. They find it very, very, very offensive. Here it comes, folks, the judge. I'm a Muslim. I find it offensive. But you have that right. But you're way outside of your boundaries of the First Amendment rights. So I'm going to stop right there.
Amen.
This man was at a Halloween parade. I don't know if anybody was dressed up as Moses or Jesus, and I really could care less. But they weren't in court getting berated by a judge being told that they're out of their boundaries of the First Amendment? Did that guy even, this is a judge, does he even know what the First Amendment says?
No, evidently not.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, the gentleman that was walking, and I'm going to correct myself, the gentleman that was walking next to this zombie Muhammad was dressed as a zombie Jesus. It was a friend of his. They were mocking both. But there weren't Jews and Christians running out of the crowd beating up the other guy. Because, you know, we all know how many Jews and Christians strap bombs to themselves and decide to take matters in their own hands.
Shouldn't the judge have recused himself?
He should have. But why should he? He gets to do this. But you have that right. You're way outside of your boundaries of the First Amendment rights. This is what, and I said it about 7.5 years ago living in other countries. When we go to other countries, it's not uncommon for people to refer to us as ugly Americans. This is why we are referred to as ugly Americans. Because we're so concerned about our own rights, we don't care about other people's rights as long as we get our say, but we don't care about what other people say. That judge recently, I think it was it last month I told you about this? I think it was last month. That judge last month actually held the defendant in contempt of court because he uploaded onto YouTube the actual video of when he was beaten up, because someone caught it on video and uploaded it onto YouTube. And the judge had told him not to. So now he's actually trying to hold this man in contempt of court for something that was in court 2 years ago, because there was a YouTube video loaded up of him being beaten up. This is what we have going on in the United States. Our Constitution is in no way, shape, or form compatible with this, and we're going to get into that right now.